Mason Grave Cole had seen men bleed on asphalt, seen brothers buried under flags, and seen enough cruelty to know the world never ran out of new ways to shame people. But nothing hit him harder than seeing his 79-year-old neighbor behind Miller's Grocery at 10:43 p.m., eating cold scraps from a trash bag with shaking hands. Eleanor Whitaker, the woman who used to leave peach pie on his porch every Sunday. She saw him and froze. Then she whispered, "Please, Mason, don't tell anyone." The alley behind Miller's Grocery smelled like spoiled milk, rainwater, and wet cardboard. A yellow security light buzzed above the back door, flickering every few seconds, making Eleanor appear and disappear in pieces. Thin white hair tucked under a blue wool hat, winter coat buttoned wrong, one slipper on her left foot and a cracked black shoe on the other. In front of her, on a flattened paper bag, were 3 pieces of cold rotisserie chicken, half a bruised apple, and the dinner roll so hard it looked like it could break a tooth. Mason stood beside his Harley, with one hand still on the throttle, unable to move. He had only stopped because he thought he saw a raccoon knock over a trash can near the loading dock. Then the shape turned, and the old woman lifted both hands like someone caught stealing from a church donation box. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. She looked over his shoulder first, not at him, at the street, at the parked cars, at the black windows of the grocery store. Then she shoved the chicken into her coat pocket like she could hide the whole scene if she moved fast enough. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice wasn't fine. It was dry, cracked, and too small for her mouth. Mason killed the engine. The sudden silence scared her more than the roar had. "Eleanor," he said, softer now, "it's me. I know who you are." She tried to stand, but her knee gave under her. One hand slapped against the dumpster, and she sucked in a breath so sharp it sounded like pain had traveled all the way to her ribs. "I dropped something." "Behind a grocery store?" "I said I'm fine." Mason took one step forward. She flinched. That stopped him cold. Mason Cole was 6'3", broad through the shoulders, with a gray beard, tattooed hands, and a Hell's Angels vest that made decent people cross streets before they had to share a sidewalk with him. He was used to strangers being afraid of him, but Eleanor had never been afraid. When he moved in 8 years ago, she had brought him a casserole, warned him not to rev after midnight, and once pointed a garden shovel at one of his brothers for stepping too close to her flowers. Mason had liked her from that day on. Now she was trembling over garbage. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from, because stories like Eleanor's don't happen in some faraway place. They happen on quiet streets, behind grocery stores, in neighborhoods where everyone thinks someone else will notice. Mason slowly raised both hands. "Okay," he said. "I'm not coming closer." Eleanor's eyes shined under the flickering light, not with tears, with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should you." She looked down at the food in her pocket. Shame hid her face before she could hide it. Mason felt something tighten behind his ribs. He had known hunger as a boy. He remembered the quiet that came with it. Eleanor had that quiet all around her. "I'm going inside," Mason said. "I'm buying you food." "No." The word cracked through the alley. He stopped. She swallowed and lowered her voice. "No, please, I can't go in there." "Why not?" Her eyes went back to the street. "They'll see." "Who?" She said nothing. The back door of Miller's Grocery opened, and a teenage employee stepped out with 2 black trash bags. He stopped when he saw them. "Everything okay?" Eleanor instantly turned her face away. Mason stepped between her and the boy. "Yeah," Mason said. "We're good." The kid looked at Mason's vest, decided that was enough conversation for one night, tossed the bags into the dumpster, and disappeared inside. Eleanor waited until the door shut before breathing again. That was when Mason noticed the white strip around her wrist, a paper medical bracelet, half hidden beneath her sleeve, but when the light flickered, he read part of it. Whitaker, Eleanor. Below that, in smaller print, Silver Pines Care. "You been in the hospital?" Mason asked. She yanked her sleeve down. "It's nothing." "Eleanor." "I said it's nothing." You've got a care bracelet on your wrist, one slipper, no purse, and you're eating out of a dumpster behind Miller's. That ain't nothing." For a second, the old fire came back into her eyes. "You think I don't know what it looks like? You think I want you to see me like this? No? Then don't make me explain it standing next to garbage." That silenced him. A car passed at the mouth of the alley, slow enough that both of them turned. Dark sedan, tinted windows. It rolled past the store, brake lights glowing red for one long second, then continued down the street. Eleanor pressed herself against the dumpster until the metal rattled. Mason watched the sedan vanish. Then he looked back at her. "Are you in trouble?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Her chin shook once. "I just need to get home." "Where's your walker?" "At home." "You walked here?" "It's only 6 blocks." "In one slipper?" "I left in a hurry." The words were quiet. Mason heard the whole story inside them. He took off his leather jacket and held it out. Eleanor stared at it like it was a trap. "You're freezing." "I don't need charity." "Good, this is a loan. If you get chicken grease on it, I'll add interest." For half a second her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost the woman from the porch with the garden shovel. Then the fear came back. Mason stepped closer, slowly, and wrapped the jacket around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. She smelled like rain, medicine, and panic. "Come on," he said. "I'll take you home." "No motorcycle." "I figured." "My hip can't." "I said I figured." He pulled out his phone. "I'll call Bull. He's got the truck." "No." Eleanor grabbed his wrist. "No calls." Her fingers were thin, blue at the knuckles. Her nails were broken. Around her thumb was a dark bruise shaped like someone had grabbed too hard. He stared at it. She saw him looking and pulled away. "Who did that?" "No one." "That's a bad lie." "It's the only one I have." He opened his phone anyway, but instead of calling Bull, he ordered a cab from an app his niece had installed and he never used. Eleanor watched every movement. "Where are you taking me?" "Home." "You promise?" "I promise." The cab arrived 12 minutes later. Eleanor still held the hard dinner roll in her pocket, like someone might take it from her. The driver looked nervous until Mason helped her into the back seat like she was made of glass. "Maple and Briar," Mason said. "White house with the blue porch." Eleanor turned sharply. "You remember?" "I live next door." "I know that," she muttered. "I'm old, not stupid." There she was again, just for a second. The cab pulled away from the grocery store. The town passed in dark, familiar blocks. Closed laundromat, gas station, church with the sign that read, "God sees all," even though Mason had started to doubt that years ago. Eleanor sat stiffly, eyes fixed on every passing car. When they turned onto Briar Street, she sank lower in the seat. "What?" "Nothing." "Eleanor." She didn't answer. The cab slowed in front of her house. Mason looked out the window. Something was wrong. Eleanor's house had always been the brightest on the block. Yellow curtains, ceramic ducks, flowers, little winter candles. Tonight, the porch was dark. The flower beds were trampled. The mailbox hung open. A white notice was taped to the door. Mason paid the driver and stepped out first. Rain misted through the streetlight. He walked up the porch steps and read the notice. "Final vacate warning." His jaw clenched. What is this? Eleanor stayed beside the cab, not moving. "They said I signed papers." "What papers?" "I didn't sign anything." Mason tried the front door. The keyhole had been replaced. Fresh metal, new screws, clean scratches around the frame. "They changed your locks." Eleanor closed her eyes, as if hearing it aloud made it real. "This is your house," Mason said. "It was." "No, it is." The cab driver shifted. "You need me to wait?" Mason didn't answer, because at that moment a light came on inside Eleanor's house. Not the porch, not the hallway, the upstairs bedroom. Eleanor made a sound so small, Mason almost missed it. A man's silhouette moved behind the curtain, then another. Mason stepped in front of her. The front door opened. A man in a gray sweater stood in the doorway, holding Eleanor's old brass lamp in one hand, like he owned the place. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven, expensive watch, smile polished smooth enough to hide teeth behind it. "Aunt Ellie," he said softly, "there you are." Eleanor's hand found the back of Mason's vest and held on. The man's eyes moved from her face to Mason's patch. His smile did not disappear, it got colder. "We've been looking everywhere for you. You scared us half to death." Mason looked past him into the house and saw two more men in the hallway. Not family, not neighbors, security. The man on the porch tilted his head. "And you must be the biker next door." "Who the hell are you?" "Caleb Whitaker," he said, "her legal guardian." Eleanor whispered behind Mason, "No." Caleb heard her. For the first time, the smile cracked. "Get inside, Eleanor," he said. "Not Aunt Ellie now, not soft, an order." Mason felt her fingers dig into his vest. Then Caleb looked him straight in the eye and said, "Walk away while this is still none of your business." Mason looked at the changed locks, the eviction notice, the bruises on Eleanor's hand, the medical bracelet, the men inside her house. Then he took one slow step onto the porch. "It became my business when I found her eating scraps behind a grocery store." Caleb's smile stayed in place, but Mason saw the work behind it. The man was measuring him. The vest, the size, the age, the kind of threat that could be handled with a phone call or one that needed something heavier. Behind Caleb, one of the men shifted. Big, shaved head, black polo stretched over his chest. His right hand hovered near his belt. Mason noticed. So did Caleb. "Careful," Caleb said. "My aunt is not well. She wanders. She gets confused. Sometimes she says things that aren't true." Eleanor made a small sound behind Mason. He didn't look back. "You change the locks on confused people often?" "I changed them because she kept leaving the stove on." "That true, Eleanor?" "No." Caleb's eyes flicked toward her. "Aunt Ellie." She shrank back. Mason felt it through the hand gripping his vest, that little recoil, that automatic fear. You didn't get that reaction from love, you got it from training. Caleb stepped onto the porch and half closed the door behind him, blocking Mason's view of the men inside. "This is a family matter." "Then why do you need security?" "She has episodes. She becomes aggressive." Eleanor stood in Mason's jacket, one shoe missing, shaking so hard the sleeve cuffs trembled. Mason looked at Caleb. "She looks real dangerous." The cab driver had not left. He sat at the curb with both hands on the wheel, watching through the windshield like a man deciding whether to call someone or pretend he saw nothing. Caleb noticed him too. That was when his voice changed. "Mr. Cole, right?" Mason's eyes narrowed. "I know the neighborhood, and I know you. Mason Cole. Road name, Grave. Arrested twice in the 90s. Assault, possession, resisting. No convictions that stuck, but still. A man with your history should be careful about involving himself with a vulnerable elderly woman." Mason almost smiled. "You run a background check on every neighbor?" "When they interfere with my aunt's care, yes." Eleanor whispered, "He took my purse." Caleb's jaw tightened. Mason heard it. "What?" "My purse, my bank card, my phone, my medicine. He said he was keeping them safe." "Aunt Ellie, stop." "And my daughter's necklace." Her voice cracked. "You said it was lost." Caleb turned fully toward her. For 1 second, the polished man disappeared. The look underneath was ugly. "You are tired. You don't know what you're saying." "I know what you did." The porch went silent. Rain tapped the gutter. Caleb pulled a folded document from his pocket. "I was hoping we wouldn't need this in front of strangers." He unfolded the paper and held it toward Mason. Mason didn't take it. This is a durable power of attorney, signed by Eleanor Whitaker, notarized, witnessed. It gives me authority over her financial, medical, and residential decisions. Eleanor shook her head. No. It also allows me to remove her from unsafe environments. No. Caleb's eyes stayed on Mason. She was placed at Silver Pines after her doctor's recommendation. She escaped this evening during transport. She refuses meals. She refuses medication. She believes people are poisoning her. That is the reality. Mason looked at the paper. There was a signature at the bottom. Eleanor M. Whitaker. It was shaky, weak, not like the firm, looping handwriting on the Christmas cards she taped to Mason's door every year. Nice story, Mason said. It's documentation. Then you won't mind if I take a picture. Caleb folded the paper immediately. No need. That's what I thought. The front door opened wider. The big man in the black polo stepped out. Everything okay, Mr. Whitaker? Mason glanced at him. You the nurse? The man didn't answer. Caleb lifted one hand. It's fine, Dean. Dean. Mason put the name away. Eleanor tugged at his vest. Mason, please, I can't go in there. Caleb heard that too. His expression softened in a way that made Mason's skin crawl. Aunt Ellie, you're frightened because you're confused. Come inside. We'll make tea. In the morning, Dr. Bell will come. No. You don't have a choice. Mason moved before Caleb finished. Not fast, not violent. Just one step to the side, putting his body fully between Eleanor and the porch. Caleb stopped. Dean stopped too. The street seemed to hold its breath. Mason, Eleanor whispered. He'll say you kidnapped me. Caleb smiled. There it was, the trap. Mason turned his head toward the cab. You recording? The driver blinked, then lifted his phone from the dashboard. Yeah, he called. Since the old lady said no. Caleb's face changed. Only for half a second, but Mason caught it. Good. Eleanor, Mason said, keeping his voice low. Do you want to go into that house? No. Do you want to leave with me? Yes. Say it louder. She fought for the word. Yes, I want to leave with Mason Cole. I do not want to go inside with Caleb. The cab driver's phone stayed raised. Dean muttered something under his breath. Caleb exhaled. Absurd. No, Mason said. Witnessed. Caleb leaned closer, quiet enough that the cab probably would not catch his words. You have no idea what you're stepping into. I'm starting to. My aunt has assets she doesn't understand. Debts she doesn't understand. Medical needs she refuses to accept. You think you're being noble because you found an old woman in an alley, but you are interfering with legal guardianship. You said power of attorney. Caleb paused. Mason's voice stayed flat. Now it's guardianship? For the first time, Caleb had no clean answer. By tomorrow afternoon, he said, it won't matter. There was the truth. Mason held his gaze, then snapped photos of the notice, the lock, Dean's face, Caleb's car, and the house number. You're making a mistake, Caleb said. I've made bigger. Mason turned to Eleanor. Come on. The cab driver unlocked the back door. Mason helped Eleanor down the porch steps. Each step hurt her. Each step was also a choice. When Mason opened the cab door, Caleb called after them. Eleanor. She froze. If you leave with him, I cannot protect you from what happens next. Eleanor looked back. For a moment, Mason thought fear would pull her out of his jacket and send her back. Then she lifted her chin. You never protected me. Caleb's face went empty. Mason helped her into the cab. The driver pulled away before anyone could say another word. For the first block, nobody spoke. Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead, breathing in small, careful pulls. Mason watched the side mirror. Caleb stood in the street until they turned the corner. Dean was beside him now. The second guard had come out too. Then they were gone. Only then did Eleanor start shaking for real. Mason didn't touch her. He just sat close enough that she knew he was there. Where do you want to go? Not police. Why? Caleb golfs with the chief. Mason believed her. Hospital? No, they'll send me back to Silver Pines. Then where? She turned to him, eyes wet. My husband's garage. Frank's old place? She nodded. Behind the house, separate door. Caleb doesn't know about the floor. What floor? Eleanor looked at the cab driver, then back at Mason. There's a box under the boards. Frank hid it before he died. What's in the box? I don't know all of it. Names, papers, a recording maybe. Frank said if anything ever happened to him, I was supposed to give it to someone who wasn't afraid of Caleb. And why didn't you? Her lips trembled. Because Frank fell down the basement stairs 3 days later. The words landed cold. Eleanor kept going, voice barely holding together. Caleb said it was an accident. Everyone said it was an accident. Frank was 82. Old men fall, old men die. That's what people say when they don't want to look closer. The cab turned onto Mason Street again, but this time Mason told the driver to stop 2 houses early and kill the headlights. They sat in the dark. Eleanor pointed through the windshield. There. Behind her house, half hidden by overgrown hedges, stood Frank's detached garage. Small, white, sagging roof, one window boarded up. Mason paid the driver double and told him to forget the address. The driver looked at Eleanor, then at Mason. I didn't see anything. Good man. When the cab left, Mason and Eleanor cut through the neighbor's side yard. Rain gathered on the grass. Eleanor leaned on him now, not from trust alone, but because her legs were failing. The back of her house was dark, too dark. No kitchen light, no upstairs light. Caleb and his men had either left or were pretending to. Mason didn't like either option. They reached the garage. Eleanor felt under a loose brick near the door and pulled out a key so old it looked black. Her hands shook too badly to fit it in the lock. Mason took it gently. The door opened with a tired groan. Inside, Frank's tools still hung in perfect order. Wrenches, hammers, a rusted saw. Eleanor stepped in like entering a grave. He loved this place. Mason found the switch. No lights. He let his hand drop. Where's the floor? She pointed to the back corner, under a rolled tarp. Mason moved the tarp and found 3 boards that didn't match the others. He worked the first board loose, then the second. Underneath was a metal box, army green, locked. Eleanor pulled a thin chain from beneath her collar. On it hung her wedding ring and a tiny silver key. I kept it here, even at Silver Pines, even when they took everything else. Mason opened the box. Inside were folders wrapped in plastic, a flash drive taped to an envelope, 3 bank statements, photographs of houses, and a small black recorder. On top of everything was a note in Frank Whitaker's handwriting. Ellie, if you are reading this, don't trust Caleb. Then floorboards creaked outside the garage. Not from the house, from right behind the door. Eleanor stopped breathing. A man's voice spoke from the darkness. I was wondering when you'd come looking for that. Mason moved before Eleanor could scream. He pushed the metal box behind his leg, stepped away from the workbench, and turned toward the garage door with both hands loose at his sides. Caleb Whitaker stood in the opening, not smiling now. His gray sweater was gone, replaced by a dark raincoat. In his right hand, he held Eleanor's brass house key like he wanted them to understand something. He could enter anywhere, any time. Behind him, Dean filled half the doorway, shoulders blocking the rain. The second security man waited near the hedge, face hidden under a black cap. Caleb looked at Eleanor first, then at the open floorboards, then at the army green box on the workbench. Oh, Aunt Ellie, he said, you really should have let the past stay buried. Mason shifted to block the box. Caleb noticed. Don't be dramatic, you don't know what's in there. Then why are you here? To stop an elderly woman from hurting herself with old delusions. Eleanor's voice came thin from behind Mason. Frank wasn't delusional. Caleb's eyes slid to her. No, Frank was bored. Old men get bored when nobody needs them anymore. Mason watched him carefully. Caleb was talking too much. Men like him did that when they thought they had already won. "You followed us," Mason said. Caleb lifted Eleanor's medical bracelet between two fingers. She touched her wrist and found it gone. Mason's stomach hardened. Silver Pines uses location tags on high-risk residents for their safety. "You tagged her like a dog." "No, I protected her from people like you." The word protected came out clean, polished by lawyers. Mason looked at Dean. "You proud of this work?" Dean didn't blink. Caleb sighed. "Dean isn't paid for opinions. That right?" "He's paid to make complicated nights simple." Rain grew harder, drumming on the garage roof. Eleanor reached for Mason's sleeve. "Mason, the recorder." Caleb's gaze snapped to her. Mason heard it too late. Dean moved. He was fast for his size. Not wild, not angry, just trained. He crossed the garage in 3 steps, one hand going for Mason's arm, the other for the workbench. Mason didn't swing. That would be what Caleb wanted. Instead, he dropped his shoulder into Dean's ribs and drove him sideways into a shelf of paint cans. Metal screamed. Old cans crashed down. One burst open, spilling white paint across the concrete. Eleanor stumbled back. The second man started in. Caleb stepped away from the doorway. "Careful, idiot. Don't damage the contents." That told Mason what mattered. Not him, not Eleanor, the box. Mason grabbed the black recorder and shoved it into his back pocket. Then he caught the flash drive, the envelope, and the top folder before Dean recovered. Dean came up angry. Mason took the hit against his shoulder and felt it down to his spine. He was 61, not 30. His body reminded him with a bright white line of pain. But he still knew how to use weight, walls, and fear. He drove an elbow back, caught Dean under the jaw, and sent him into Frank's tool rack. Wrenches fell like bells. "Stop," Caleb snapped. Everyone froze. Not because Caleb was loud. Because he had pulled Eleanor in front of him. His hand was clamped around her upper arm, right over the old bruises. Her face had gone white with pain, but she didn't make a sound. Mason hated him for that. Not the grabbing, the fact that Caleb knew exactly where to grab. "Put it down," Caleb said. Mason looked at Eleanor. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "No." Caleb tightened his grip. Her knees bent. "I said put it down." Mason slowly placed the box back on the workbench. "Everything." Mason held up the folder and envelope, then set them on top. He kept the recorder in his back pocket. Caleb searched his face for the lie. Mason gave him nothing. "This is the problem with people like Frank," Caleb said. "They think paper saves them. Old receipts, copies, recordings, as if the world runs on truth." He dragged Eleanor one step toward the workbench. "The world runs on signatures, Mr. Cole. By noon tomorrow, Eleanor will be declared incompetent in front of a judge who already believes she wanders, steals food, and becomes paranoid around family. She steals food because you took her money." Caleb's mouth twitched. "She eats garbage because she refuses help. That is what the record says." Eleanor finally spoke. "You made the record." The garage changed around that sentence. Rain, men, box, pain. All of it went quiet. "You made the record." Caleb's expression turned flat. "And who will believe you? A confused widow who crawls through alleys? Or her nephew who left his job, his home, and his family to arrange her care?" "You came for the house," Eleanor whispered. Caleb leaned closer to her ear. "I came because Frank should have sold when he had the chance." There it was. Caleb realized it a second too late. Mason glanced toward the back wall. A small side door sat half covered by a tarp. It might open. It might not. Bad plans were sometimes better than waiting for worse ones. "Caleb," Mason said. Caleb looked at him. "You really think this ends with you taking that box?" "No, it ends with my aunt going back where doctors say she belongs." It ends with you forgetting tonight, unless you want your club dragged into an elder abduction charge. It ends with the house being sold to cover her care, exactly as the court will approve. Sounds expensive. Care is expensive. So is silence. Caleb stared at him. Mason smiled without warmth. How much did Silver Pines charge Frank's neighbor before her house sold? Caleb didn't answer, but Eleanor looked up. What neighbor? Mason kept his eyes on Caleb. He had thrown it out like bait. One name from the folder, Dorothy Haynes. Caleb's silence confirmed enough. Eleanor turned toward him. Dorothy didn't move to Florida? Caleb's grip shifted, nervous. Mason used that half second. He kicked the fallen paint can. White paint sprayed across Dean's boots and the concrete. Dean looked down on instinct. Mason drove backward into the second man, slammed him into the wall, and lunged for Eleanor. Caleb jerked her away, but Eleanor did something Mason never expected. She bit him, hard. Caleb shouted, releasing her arm. Mason caught her around the waist, lifted her off her feet, and shoved through the tarp toward the side door. Dean roared behind him. Mason hit the latch with his hip. Nothing happened. The door stuck. Dean's hand grabbed the back of Mason's vest. Mason slammed his shoulder into the door again. Wood cracked. The door burst open into rain. He and Eleanor spilled into the narrow strip between garage and fence. Mud swallowed Mason's boots. Eleanor nearly fell, but he kept one arm around her and ran bent low, half carrying her toward the alley behind the houses. Move, Eleanor. I'm trying. A crash came from the garage. Dean forced through the side door. Mason saw his own house 2 yards down. Dark windows, empty driveway. His Harley was still at Miller's. No fast escape, no weapon, no backup. Only the phone in his front pocket. He dragged Eleanor behind a row of trash bins, pulled out the phone, and hit the first contact on his emergency list. Bull answered on the second ring. This better involve fire or blood? Both, maybe, Mason said. My house, back alley, bring the truck, no sirens, call June. Bull's voice changed instantly. How many? 3, maybe more. Private security, Caleb Whitaker. I'm moving. Mason ended the call. Eleanor was breathing hard beside him, one hand pressed to her chest. Rain ran down her face. I can't keep running. You won't have to. Footsteps hit mud near the garage. Dean's voice cut through the rain. Cole, don't make this worse. Mason looked over the bins. Dean moved slowly, scanning dark yards. The second man had a flashlight. Caleb stood under the broken side door, one hand wrapped in a handkerchief where Eleanor had bitten him. The metal box was tucked under his other arm. Mason cursed under his breath. Eleanor saw it. He has Frank's box. Not all of it. She looked at him. Mason pulled the black recorder from his pocket. Eleanor's eyes widened. Thunder rolled overhead. Mason pressed play. For 2 seconds, only static. Then an old man's voice filled the dark, low and raspy but steady. Frank Whitaker. Ellie, if you're hearing this, then I was right to be afraid. Eleanor covered her mouth. Mason turned the volume down, but not off. Start with Silver Pines, Frank said. It isn't a care home. It's where they make people disappear while the paperwork catches up. Mason felt the words settle like iron. Across the yard, Caleb's flashlight swept closer. Frank's voice crackled again. And if Caleb tells you I fell... The recording popped, skipped. Then came the next sentence, clear as a confession whispered from the grave. Ask him why he was standing at the top of the stairs. Eleanor stopped breathing. Mason looked at her. Then headlights turned into the alley. 1 pair, then another, then 6 more. Engines growled low in the rain. Bull's truck rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley, followed by motorcycles that filled the wet street with black leather, chrome, and silence. Caleb froze. Dean turned. Mason stood slowly from behind the trash bins, recorder in his hand. Bull stepped out of the truck with June beside him, gray hair tucked under a hood, eyes already on Eleanor. Behind them, more brothers dismounted in the rain. Not shouting, not threatening, just arriving. Mason looked at Caleb through the darkness. "You were right about one thing," he said. "This just got complicated." June lifted her phone, aimed it at Caleb, and said, "Start recording." Phones came up. Small red dots glowed in the dark alley, aimed at Caleb, at the metal box under his arm, at Dean with paint on his boots and blood on his lip, at Eleanor shaking beside Mason in a jacket that swallowed her whole. Caleb looked at the phones, then at Mason, then at the motorcycles blocking the alley. For the first time that night, he didn't look angry, he looked exposed. Bull stepped forward. He was built like a refrigerator with a beard, but his hands stayed open at his sides. June stood beside him, 5'4", 70 years old, former paralegal, widow of a rider, and the only person Mason knew who could make a man sweat by asking for a receipt. "Mr. Whitaker," June said, "that box belongs to Eleanor. This is family property." "That was my husband's box," Eleanor said. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the phones. "Eleanor, you're confused." June smiled without kindness. "Careful, every time you say that, I'm adding it to a file." Dean shifted. "Boss, we should go." Nobody missed it. "Boss." Caleb's jaw worked once. "You hired muscle to handle your aunt?" Mason said. "I hired patient transport security." Bull let out a low laugh. "That what you call eating trash behind Miller's?" Caleb ignored him and fixed on June. "You are interfering in a medical custody matter." June pulled on her glasses. "Medical custody? Interesting. Is there an active guardianship order?" Caleb said nothing. "Power of attorney?" Silence. "Emergency hold from a licensed physician?" His nostrils flared. June nodded. "So what you have is a scared old woman, new locks on her house, private men chasing her through a garage, and property that does not belong to you." Dean took half a step forward. Bull moved in front of June. That was all. No fists, no threats, just one wall of a man becoming a larger wall. Caleb slowly lifted his left hand. "All right, take the box." He held it out. Mason didn't move. June did. She walked through the rain with her phone still recording. When she reached Caleb, she waited, made him hold it there, made the camera catch his face, the box, the moment he gave it up. Then she took it. Caleb leaned closer. "You people think numbers make you safe." June looked up. "No, numbers make people look." His eyes sharpened. Mason stepped toward him. "You're done for tonight." Caleb laughed once. "You really believe that?" "I believe you're standing in an alley with stolen property, 3 witnesses, and 11 phones pointed at you." "Stolen?" Caleb's smile returned thin and ugly. "You have no idea what's already been signed." Eleanor whispered, "I didn't sign." Caleb turned to her. For 1 second, he forgot the cameras. "You signed enough." The words hung there. June's thumb moved on her phone. "Got that?" Caleb's face hardened. Then headlights flashed at the end of Briar Street. A dark sedan rolled slowly past the alley entrance, not stopping, just watching. Mason saw Caleb notice it, saw relief pass through him like warmth. He wasn't alone. That made Mason's stomach go cold. Caleb backed away. Dean and the second man moved with him. "This isn't over." Mason looked at the sedan disappearing down the street. "No, I don't think it is." Caleb smiled at Eleanor one last time. "Sleep well, Aunt Ellie." Then he turned and walked into the rain. Only after their taillights disappeared did Eleanor's knees buckle. Mason caught her before she hit the mud. "Easy, I got you." She clutched his vest. "The box. Don't let them take it again." June held it up. "They won't." Bull opened the passenger door of his truck and helped Eleanor inside. Someone handed her a blanket. Someone else gave her water. She held it with both hands but didn't drink. Mason stood in the alley, staring at her house. Her own house. Dark. Locked. Occupied by strangers 15 minutes ago. How did someone steal a life so quietly? A signature here, a doctor's note there, a changed lock, a closed bank account. A polite phone call explaining the old woman was confused. No gun, no broken window, just paperwork. That somehow made it worse. "Mason," June said. He turned. She had the recorder in one hand and the box in the other. Her face had changed. The sharpness was still there, but beneath it was something heavier. "We need to get her somewhere safe, not your house, not hers. The clubhouse. And legal help before morning." Bull looked at Mason. "How big is this?" Mason glanced at Eleanor in the truck, then at the wet envelope he had pulled from Frank's box. "Bigger than one house." The ride to the clubhouse took 12 minutes. They didn't roar through town. They moved quiet, almost ceremonial. Bull's truck in the center, bikes in front and behind like a moving fence. Rain streamed off helmets and headlights. Curtains shifted in dark houses as they passed. Let the town wonder why Hell's Angels were escorting one old woman at midnight. Let Caleb hear about it. The clubhouse sat at the edge of the industrial district, an old brick machine shop most people drove past faster than necessary. Inside, the room went silent when Eleanor came in. Riders stood without being asked. Tommy cleared the long table. Bull guided her into a chair. Someone brought soup. Someone found dry socks. Big men who could scare a gas station clerk suddenly moved like nurses in a church basement. Eleanor stared at them, overwhelmed. "I can't pay for any of this." Mason sat across from her. "Good. We don't take money from neighbors." An old rider named Preacher slid a mug of tea in front of her, except pie. For the first time that night, Eleanor almost smiled. "Frank used to like your club," she said. "He said you boys looked rough, but you fixed what you broke." Preacher's face softened. "Frank fixed my shovel head in '09. Wouldn't take cash. Said I could pay him by not dying on it." June placed the metal box on the table. The room changed again. Every eye moved to it. Mason pulled up a chair beside June. "What do we have?" "Not enough yet," she said, "but more than Caleb wanted us to see." She opened the box and laid items out on the table. Folders, bank records, old photographs of houses, copies of deeds, a flash drive wrapped in masking tape, the black recorder, a handwritten list in Frank's blocky script. June read the first page and went still. "What?" She didn't answer. Her eyes moved down the list line by line. Then she whispered, "Dear God." Bull leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" June turned the paper so Mason could see. Names, 23 of them. Dorothy Haynes, Walter Briggs, Martha Kellerman, Leon Price, Agnes Bell. Each name had an address beside it, a date, a bank, a note. Moved to Silver Pines. House sold. No surviving children. Guardianship approved. Estate depleted. Deceased. Eleanor stared at the page. "I know some of those people. Dorothy lived 2 streets over. Walter brought tomatoes to church. Agnes..." Her voice faded. "Agnes told me her niece stopped calling." June looked up slowly. "I worked probate for 32 years. I've seen greedy families. I've seen nursing homes bleed people dry one invoice at a time." She tapped the list. "This is organized." Mason picked up one photo, then another. Different houses, same note on the back. Buyer, Breyer Development Group. June opened a bank statement. "Eleanor, did you authorize a transfer for $19,000 3 weeks ago?" "No." "To Whitaker Family Management, LLC?" "I don't know what that is." June looked at Mason. Mason already knew. Caleb. The clubhouse phone rang. Everyone turned. Nobody used that number except members, old friends, and people who knew better than to call unless it mattered. Tommy picked up, listened. His face changed. "Mason, it's Sally from Miller's Grocery." Mason took the phone. "Sally?" Her voice shook. "That man came back." "What man?" "Nice coat, scary smile. Asked if we had security footage behind the store. Said his aunt had an episode and he needed it for a doctor." What did you tell him? That the manager handles cameras in the morning. Good. No, Mason, listen. After he left, I checked the office. Somebody already wiped tonight's footage. Mason's hand tightened around the phone. Across the table, June inserted the flash drive into an old laptop. The screen blinked. A folder opened. Rows of scanned documents filled the screen, and one video file. June clicked it. Frank Whitaker appeared on the screen, sitting in the same garage they had just run from. He looked thinner than Mason remembered, but his eyes were clear. If this file is open, Frank said, then they have started with Ellie. Eleanor made a broken sound. Frank leaned closer to the camera. There are 23 names in my box, but those are only the ones I could prove. Mason felt the room go colder. Frank's voice dropped. There are more. June paused the video. The silence afterward was worse than the voice. Mason looked at the handwritten list again. Dorothy Haynes, 2 streets over. Date, March 14th. Silver Pines intake, March 16th. House sale, April 2nd. Deceased, May 9th. 6 weeks. A whole life reduced to 6 weeks and 4 lines of ink. Eleanor's hand dropped from her mouth. Dorothy's sister came by last spring, she whispered. She knocked on my door because Dorothy wasn't answering. Caleb told me not to talk to her. He said Dorothy had become paranoid. June's jaw tightened. That's how they do it. How who does it? Mason asked. Predators with paperwork. June pushed the laptop back. They isolate the person first, cut off phone access, tell neighbors they're confused, tell relatives they're unstable. Then they get a doctor's note, a temporary order, a financial authorization. By the time anyone asks questions, the house is sold, the money is moved, and the victim is too medicated to fight or dead. Bull's fist closed on the back of a chair hard enough to make the wood creak. So we go get Caleb? No, June said sharply. Every eye moved to her. That is exactly what he wants. One broken window, one punch, one threat on camera, and tomorrow every headline says violent motorcycle gang abducts elderly woman and attacks legal guardian. Then Eleanor goes back to Silver Pines, Mason goes to jail, and Caleb walks into court looking like a hero. Mason hated that she was right. He sat down slowly. What do we do? June tapped Frank's list. We prove the pattern. Within 10 minutes, the clubhouse changed from shelter to war room. Coffee, phones, old laptops, printer paper, and riders quietly calling county clerks. Preacher took Dorothy Haynes. Bull took Walter Briggs. Saint, a younger rider who worked nights as a tow dispatcher and knew how to find public records faster than most lawyers, started searching Briar Development Group. Tommy drove back to Miller's to talk to Sally and see if erased footage had a backup. June called an attorney in the next county, not the town's regular circle. Anita Ross, who had once defended a club member's daughter in a custody case and had not flinched when 12 bikers sat behind her in court. Mason stayed with Eleanor. She sat wrapped in a blanket, watching strangers fight for her with printers and phone calls. The soup in front of her had gone cold. She had eaten 3 spoonfuls, then stopped like her body had forgotten what food was for. You need more, Mason said. I'm listening. You can listen and eat. You sound like Frank. Frank had sense. Her eyes moved back to the laptop, where his face was frozen mid-sentence. For months, I thought he was getting obsessed. He came home from the bank angry, sat in the garage with papers. He told me people were losing houses. I told him maybe their children were helping them sell. I told him not every shadow was a wolf. She swallowed. Then he died, and Caleb told me grief makes people invent villains. Mason said nothing. Eleanor looked at the list. I believed the wrong man. No, you trusted family. That's not a crime. It should be, when family looks like Caleb. Across the room, Bull slammed a hand on the table. Walter Briggs' house sold for cash to Briar Development. His daughter lives in Idaho. Says she filed 2 missing person reports because Silver Pines kept telling her he refused visitors. June looked up. In writing? She's emailing now. Preacher raised his phone. Dorothy's sister says Dorothy never had dementia, arthritis and a bad knee. Silver Pines told her Dorothy got violent and refused family. 2 months later, they said she died in her sleep. Saint turned his laptop around. Briar Development Group is owned by 3 shell companies. One has a mailing address at Caleb's law office. The room darkened without the lights changing. "How many houses?" Mason asked. Saint didn't answer. That was answer enough. "How many?" "On Frank's list? 23. "Countywide, over 18 months?" Saint looked sick. 41 connected to Briar, maybe more. Eleanor closed her eyes. 41. 41 homes turned into signatures for someone else. Mason walked toward the far wall, needing space before anger made him stupid. On the wall, a faded photo showed Mason younger beside Frank Whitaker, who held a wrench and a grin. Mason remembered what Frank had told him that day. "A loud bike doesn't make a man dangerous. Leaving people alone when they need you does." Now the words felt like a debt. The clubhouse door opened and Tommy came in wet from the rain, holding a small black device in a plastic grocery bag. "Sally found the backup drive. Manager keeps one under the register because the store got robbed last year and the system failed. Caleb wiped the office computer. Didn't know about this." June took the bag carefully. "Does it show Eleanor?" Tommy nodded. "Shows her behind the store. Shows Mason finding her. Shows she was alone before he got there." Mason exhaled. That mattered. Then Tommy's face changed. "What else?" Mason asked. "It also shows a black sedan parked across the street 20 minutes before you arrived." Eleanor's eyes opened. "Same sedan from Briar Street?" Bull asked. Tommy nodded. "Can't get the plate, but someone was watching her." Eleanor whispered, "I knew it." June inserted the drive. The footage stuttered, then appeared. Grainy black and white alley, dumpster, security light, Eleanor moving like a ghost through the frame. Nobody spoke while they watched her search the trash. Mason couldn't look at her, not because he was ashamed of her, because he was ashamed of everyone else. The whole town had driven past this woman. Him too, maybe. Then the sedan appeared at the edge of the frame, parked, waiting. 10 minutes later, Eleanor looked toward it and hid behind the dumpster. June froze the image. That is surveillance, not concern. Mason leaned closer. The driver's window reflected just enough to reveal a face. Dean. Bull muttered, "Patient transport security, my ass." The clubhouse phone rang again. Everyone turned. June answered and put it on speaker. "Steel Road Clubhouse?" A woman's voice came through, breathless and scared. "Is Eleanor there?" Eleanor straightened. June looked at her. "Who is this?" "My name is Margaret Haynes. Dorothy Haynes was my sister. A man named Bull called me." June softened. "Eleanor is here." "Tell her I'm sorry," Margaret said, voice breaking. "Please tell her I came back 3 times. They told me Dorothy hated me. They told me she signed papers saying she didn't want contact. I believed them for a while, but then I got a birthday card returned from Silver Pines stamped "No resident by that name." I called the police. Nobody did anything." Eleanor's eyes filled. "I'm here, Margaret. I'm here." There was a pause. Then Margaret began to cry. "My sister called me the night before they took her. She said a man with gold cufflinks was in her kitchen. She said he told her the house would do more good for the living than for a woman waiting to die." June's pen stopped. Mason turned slowly. Gold cufflinks. Caleb had worn gold cufflinks on the porch. Eleanor shook. "Dorothy told you that?" "Yes, and then she said something else. I didn't understand." "What?" Mason asked. "She said, if they come for Ellie, tell Frank the basement wasn't the only place." Eleanor went pale. Mason stepped closer. "What does that mean?" She stared at Frank's frozen face on the laptop. "The church," she whispered. June frowned. What about the church? Frank kept a safe deposit box for boring things, bonds, birth certificates, insurance. But after Caleb started coming around, he said banks weren't safe anymore. So he gave something to Reverend Paul at St. Agnes. He said if anything happened to both of us, the church would know what to do. Mason reached for his jacket. Bull stood. "I'll get the truck." June snapped the box shut. "No, not all of us. Mason, Bull, me. Saint stays and copies every file. Preacher calls Anita again. Tommy backs up that grocery footage 3 places. Eleanor tried to rise. "I'm coming." "No," Mason said. "My husband hid it." "And Caleb is out there." "Then I'm definitely coming." For a moment, they stared at each other. Mason saw fear in her face. Beneath it, something else had returned. The woman with the shovel. He gave a short nod. "Fine, but you stay in the truck." They had just reached the clubhouse door when headlights swept across the front windows. One pair, then another. Red and blue lights flashed against the brick walls. Mason looked through the blinds. 3 police cruisers rolled into the lot, then a 4th, a 5th. Behind them, standing under an umbrella beside the lead cruiser, was Caleb Whitaker. His face was calm again, the kind of calm that came from making the first official move. An officer stepped out, one hand near his holster, and shouted through the rain. "Mason Cole, we have a report of elder abduction. Bring Eleanor Whitaker out now." Inside the clubhouse, Eleanor whispered, "He told you." Mason looked at Caleb through the glass. Caleb lifted one hand. Not a wave, a reminder. The paperwork had arrived. The command hit the clubhouse like a hammer. Nobody moved. Rain snapped against the windows. Red and blue lights slid over Eleanor's pale face. Outside, 5 cruisers idled, and Caleb stood beneath a black umbrella like the law had always opened doors for him. Bull's hands curled into fists. Mason saw it and shook his head once. "No." Bull's jaw worked. "They're not taking her. Not like this." "You heard him." "I heard him, and I heard June." June was already gathering papers. She placed Frank's list, the grocery footage drive, and copied bank statements into a folder, then looked at Eleanor. "Do you trust me?" Eleanor's eyes were fixed on the flashing lights. "I don't know who to trust anymore." "Good answer." June handed the metal box to Saint. "Lock this in the safe. Copy everything before anybody gets near it." The officer outside shouted again. "Mason Cole, open the door." Mason walked to the front window and pulled the blind aside. The lead officer was Sergeant Ray Hollis. Mason knew him. Everybody in town knew Hollis. He was the kind of cop who looked polite until he had permission not to be. Thick neck, trim mustache, wedding ring he wore when it helped and forgot when it didn't. Caleb leaned toward him and said something Mason couldn't hear. Hollis nodded. Of course he nodded. Mason turned back. "Everybody calm, hands visible, phones recording, but no one shoves a camera in a cop's face. Nobody talks unless June talks." Preacher muttered, "Since when do we let cops walk into our house?" Mason looked at him. "Since there's an old woman's life on the table and Caleb wants us stupid." That ended it. Mason opened the door. Rain rushed in. Hollis stepped under the awning with 2 officers behind him. Caleb stayed near the cruiser, letting the uniform do the touching. "Mason, step aside." "You got a warrant?" "We have a report of an endangered adult being unlawfully restrained." "She walked in." "Step aside." June came up beside Mason. "Sergeant Hollis, I'm June Keller. I represent Mrs. Whitaker as a witness advocate tonight." "Are you an attorney?" "No, but the attorney is on her way, and this is being recorded from 6 angles, so let's all use our best manners." One younger officer shifted. Hollis didn't. "Where is Eleanor Whitaker?" Eleanor stood before Mason could stop her. "I'm here." Every head turned. She stepped into the open, wrapped in a blanket, Mason's jacket over her shoulders, white hair damp at the temples. She looked small in that room of bikers, but her back was straight. Caleb moved instantly. "Aunt Ellie, thank God!" Eleanor didn't look at him.
Hollis softened his tone. "Mrs. Whitaker, are you being held here against your will?"
"No."
"Did Mr. Cole remove you from your residence tonight?"
"No."
Caleb stepped closer.
"She's confused, Sergeant. She left Silver Pines during a medical episode." Eleanor's eyes snapped to him. "I refused to return to you." Caleb smiled sadly for the audience. "That's exactly what I mean." June opened her folder. "Sergeant, before you act on Mr. Whitaker's story, we have footage of Eleanor alone behind Miller's grocery, eating from a dumpster while Mr. Whitaker's hired security watched from a sedan. We also have evidence of altered property records, unauthorized transfers, and a recorded statement from her late husband implicating Caleb Whitaker in elder exploitation." The younger officer looked at Caleb. Hollis didn't. "Ma'am, you can give that to detectives in the morning." "And tonight?" "Tonight we return Mrs. Whitaker to medical care." Eleanor's hand tightened on the blanket. Mason felt the room tense behind him. Caleb was trying not to smile. Hollis stepped toward Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitaker, Silver Pines has confirmed you are listed as high risk. They say you missed medication." "They drugged me," Caleb sighed. "Aunt Ellie." She turned on him. "My name is Eleanor." The room went silent. "My name is Eleanor May Whitaker. I was born on August 9th, 1946 in Mercy County Hospital. I married Franklin James Whitaker on June 3rd, 1967. We bought my house on Briar Street in 1974 for $28,000. The mortgage was paid off on October 12, 1999. My daughter Caroline died last year on November 18th. She wore a silver necklace with a blue stone. Caleb said it was lost, but he took it from my bedroom drawer." Caleb's face tightened. Eleanor kept going. "My checking account ends in 4419. My pharmacy is Bell's on Market Street. My blood pressure medicine is lisinopril 10 milligrams. I am allergic to codeine. I do not have dementia. I do not hallucinate. I do not wander. I was hungry because my cards were taken. I was cold because my locks were changed. And I was afraid because every time I told the truth, someone called it confusion." No one spoke. Even the rain seemed quieter. Hollis looked at Caleb now. For the first time, really looked. Caleb recovered fast. "Many dementia patients retain long-term memory. That doesn't mean—" "She just gave you her bank number," Bull growled. June handed Hollis one paper. Hospital record. Eleanor was admitted for a minor stroke evaluation on the same date this power of attorney was allegedly signed and notarized across town. She couldn't have been in both places. Hollis took the paper. His expression changed by 1 inch. 1 inch mattered. Caleb saw it and moved in. "Sergeant, with respect, you are not qualified to evaluate legal documents at midnight in a biker clubhouse. There is an emergency hearing scheduled. Silver Pines is prepared to receive her. If these people have concerns, they can present them properly." Properly. Mason almost laughed. That word did more damage than fists ever could. Hollis folded the paper. "Mrs. Whitaker, there is a temporary medical transport order." June snapped. "Issued by whom?" "Dr. Bell." Eleanor's face went gray. "Who's Dr. Bell?" Mason asked. "Caleb's friend." Hollis avoided Mason's eyes. That was when Mason knew. Maybe Hollis wasn't fully bought. Maybe he wasn't part of it. But he was comfortable enough to follow the paper and ignore the woman standing in front of him. 2 white vans turned into the lot. Silver Pines Care. Eleanor took 1 step back. Mason moved in front of her. Hollis put his hand near his belt. "Don't." Mason froze. Behind him, every rider went still. Outside, Caleb lowered his umbrella slightly, watching with bright eyes. This was the picture Caleb wanted. Bikers resisting police, old woman in the middle. June leaned close. "Don't give him the picture." Mason breathed once. Twice. then stepped aside. Eleanor looked at him, betrayed for half a second. It cut deeper than Dean's punch. "I'm sorry," Mason said quietly, "but I'm not done." Two Silver Pines attendants came in with a wheelchair. One was a woman Mason didn't know. The other was Dean, now wearing a dark jacket with a Silver Pines badge clipped to his pocket. Mason stared at him. Dean smiled. Eleanor saw him and whispered, "No." Hollis frowned. "You work for Silver Pines?" Dean gave a professional nod. "Security transport, Sergeant. Patient has a history of agitation." June lifted her phone. "Say that again?" Dean's smile vanished. Eleanor backed away. "He chased me. He was in my garage." Caleb spoke from the doorway. "This is exactly why she needs care." Mason's hands shook once at his sides. He forced them still. Dean reached for Eleanor's arm. She jerked back. "Don't touch me." The woman attendant hesitated. Dean didn't. He took Eleanor by the elbow, right where Caleb had grabbed her. Her face twisted with pain. Mason stepped forward. Hollis barked, "Cole!" Mason stopped with every muscle in his body screaming. Eleanor looked at him. Her eyes were wet now, but she didn't cry. As they guided her into the wheelchair, she leaned toward him. "Room 214. Mason bent lower. "What?" "Silver Pines, room 214. Don't let them give me the blue pills." Dean shoved the chair forward. "Enough!" Mason's eyes lifted to him. Dean looked away first. They wheeled Eleanor into the rain. Caleb stepped beside her, umbrella tilted over himself more than her. "Aunt Ellie," he said softly, "this could have been easier." Eleanor looked up at him. Even in the chair, even surrounded, even being taken away, she found strength for one last sentence. "Frank was right about you." Caleb's face went blank. Then the van doors opened. Dean loaded her inside. Mason watched the doors close. The lock clicked. The sound was small. It felt final. The vans pulled out first. Caleb's sedan followed. Then two cruisers. Hollis remained at the doorway, rain dripping from his hat. "Mason," he said, "quieter now. Don't make this worse." Mason looked at him. "You just helped them take a hungry old woman back to the people she's afraid of." Hollis didn't answer. "Tomorrow, when this breaks open, remember I gave you a chance to be on the right side before it was safe." Hollis swallowed once, then walked back into the rain. When the last cruiser left, the clubhouse was silent. For 3 seconds. Then Mason turned. "June." "Already calling Anita." "Bull." "Truck's ready." "Saint?" Saint came from the office, pale. "I copied Frank's files." "Good." June lowered the phone. "Anita says if Silver Pines medicates her before the hearing, they can make her look incompetent. We need proof tonight." Mason looked around the room. Every rider was standing now. No one needed to be asked twice. He picked up his vest and put it on over his wet shirt. "We're not storming anything. We're going to watch. Record. Find someone inside who still has a conscience." Bull nodded toward the window. "And if they don't?" Mason looked toward the road where Eleanor had disappeared. "Then by sunrise, we bring so many witnesses to Silver Pines, they won't be able to breathe without being seen." Silver Pines looked peaceful from the road. That was the first lie. The white sign glowed between trimmed hedges. Silver Pines Memory Care. Compassion. Dignity. Home. Warm lamps shone in every window. But the side gate closed behind Eleanor's transport van with the soft sound of a lock. Mason, Bull, June, Saint, Preacher, and Lopez parked 2 blocks away. No roaring bikes, no colors at the door. Caleb wanted a picture of angry bikers storming a care facility. Mason refused to give it to him. Then Mason's phone buzzed. A woman whispered, "My name is Carla Ruiz. I used to work nights at Silver Pines. If Eleanor is in room 214, she's in the East Wing. Quiet wing. No family cameras." June leaned closer. "What are the blue pills?" "Sedatives. They chart refusal, then agitation, then medical necessity. By morning, she'll look confused, and Caleb gets guardianship. Mason checked the time, 11:18. When? Medication starts at 11:30. There's a nurse named Nina Patel, laundry door, east side, 11:25. She's scared, but she isn't dirty. Behind Silver Pines, the perfect building turned ugly. Dumpsters, stained brick, humming vents, yellow windows with blinds pulled tight. At 11:26, a woman in blue scrubs stepped out with 2 trash bags and froze when Mason appeared. Nina? You can't be here. Neither can Eleanor. Nina shoved a folded sheet at June. Dr. Bell ordered a sedative for agitation. Eleanor hasn't been agitated. She's been crying. Dean told me to chart that she struck staff. Did she? Bull asked. She can barely stand. Mason looked at the laundry door. Nina shook her head. I can't let you in. But room 214 faces the courtyard.
The window opens 4 inches. Can you delay the dose? June asked. Nina looked like she might break. 10 minutes, maybe 15. And Mason? Eleanor keeps saying Frank hid something in the church. Caleb knows. Mason sent preacher and 2 riders to St. Agnes with one order. Watch, record, do not touch. Then Mason, June, and Lopez slipped into the courtyard. A weak light glowed behind beige curtains. Lopez pointed up. 214, Mason tapped. The curtain shifted. Eleanor's pale face appeared. Mason? I'm here. Don't take the pills. They said if I refuse, they'll write that I'm combative. June lifted the medication sheet. We have proof. Eleanor pressed her shaking hand to the glass. Frank's church box, not the office, not the safe. He said sinners hide things in holy places because nobody checks the dead. The cemetery? June whispered. Eleanor nodded. Frank's grave. Before Mason could answer, Dean's voice sounded inside. Mrs. Whitaker, step away from the window. The curtain ripped closed. Eleanor cried out. Mason moved, but June grabbed his vest. If you go in, Caleb wins. Then tell me how she doesn't lose. June looked at him. You said by sunrise they wouldn't breathe without being seen. Make it sunrise early. Mason opened the club channel. Wake everyone. All chapters within 2 hours. No weapons, no alcohol, no hotheads. Cameras charged. Full tanks. Destination, Silver Pines Memory Care. How many you need? Mason looked up at Eleanor's closed window. All of them. The next minutes caught fire. June recorded Dean ordering Eleanor to sit still, Eleanor refusing medication, and Nina saying, She is verbally refusing. You cannot force it without a physician present. Then the fire alarm screamed. Nina had bought them time. At the same moment, Bull called. Caleb's at St. Agnes. He pulled a metal tube from under Frank's headstone. Preacher got it on video. Follow. Do not stop him. I hate this plan. So do I. The first ambulance reached Silver Pines at 11:58. A patrol car followed. At 12:11, the first motorcycles arrived. 7, then 12, then 20. No revving, no shouting, just witnesses. By 12:40, there were more than 100. A reporter van appeared. Families arrived after late-night calls. The quiet machine was being forced to operate in public. At 1:03, EMTs brought Eleanor out in a wheelchair. Her head drooped, eyes unfocused. Dr. Bell appeared and said she required intervention for her own safety. Nina shouted, He wasn't even in the room. She refused. Dean held her arm. Bell signed after. Eleanor lifted her head. Mason. He stepped close. I'm here. They gave me something. Not blue. A shot. Mason looked at Dean. Dean looked away. Anita Ross cut through the reporters with a stamped emergency petition. Any attempt to remove, medicate, isolate, or transfer Eleanor Whitaker without independent evaluation will be treated as obstruction. Then the road trembled.
Headlights appeared around the bend. Dozens, then dozens more. Hell's Angels from the North Chapter, then the West. Old men on trikes, women with gray braids, veterans, mechanics, fathers, widows, people who had left warm beds because an old woman had been found eating scraps and someone finally asked why. By 1:30 a.m., the parking lot, road, and shoulders were full. Almost 300 motorcycles, almost 300 witnesses. Residents appeared at windows, pale faces behind glass, wrinkled hands touching curtains. Then Saint ran up with preacher cemetery footage. Caleb's voice played through the phone. "If the old woman talks tomorrow, we lose the whole chain. Get the Breyer files out tonight. Burn what's left at the house." Eleanor whispered, "My house." Mason crouched in front of her. "You're the evidence now." Her cold hand gripped him. "Frank died trying to keep that house from them. Don't let them burn him twice." Most riders stayed at Silver Pines so no one could move Eleanor unseen. Bull took 50 riders to Breyer Street to clear neighbors and record everything. Mason rode with Lopez behind them. Ahead, smoke stained the night. On Breyer Street, motorcycles lined both sides of the road, leaving a lane for fire trucks. Eleanor's house stood in the center, with smoke leaking from the basement windows. Not a full blaze, a beginning. Beginnings could still be stopped. Bull met Mason. "Neighbors clear, back door forced, someone's inside." On the porch step, Mason found Frank's metal document tube. Empty. Lopez coughed near the side hatch. "Basement's open, I saw light moving." Mason handed the tube to Bull. "Give it to June." Then he pulled his bandana over his mouth and went down. Smoke burned his throat. Frank's neat basement had been ripped apart. A photo album lay open near a puddle of accelerant, its plastic pages curling. Near the furnace, one of Caleb's men was feeding papers into a burning trash can. The man turned and ran. Mason went for the papers. He stomped flames, kicked the can back, and grabbed a half-burned folder. The man hit him from the side. They crashed to the floor. Smoke swallowed them. The man clawed for the folder, not Mason's throat. The folder mattered. Mason shoved him away, then saw a small wall safe pulled open behind old paneling. Inside sat a black hard drive labeled Breyer/SP/CW. Mason grabbed it. A firefighter hauled him out as Bull pointed into the smoke. The guard was dragged out coughing, hands burned, still trying to hide his face. Outside, Mason lifted the hard drive. At the end of the street, Caleb sat in a black sedan, watching his plan burn wrong. Then June called. Eleanor's blood work came back. It wasn't just a sedative. They gave her something that could stop her heart. Mason started toward Caleb, but Bull caught his shoulder. "No, he wants that picture. He tried to kill her." "I know. Make him scared of the right things." Mason stopped and raised the hard drive high enough for every phone to see. Caleb's smile faded. Anita arrived with county investigators and bagged the hard drive. June took the burned folder. The top page was still readable. Breyer Development Group, Silver Pines Medical Holdings, Whitaker Family Management LLC. An investigator pulled a phone from the detained guard's pocket. One unread message glowed on the screen. "Burn all Breyer files. If Cole shows, leave him inside." The sender was Dr. Bell. Caleb's sedan reversed hard and tore down Breyer Street with no headlights. 3 riders moved toward bikes. Mason shouted, "No chase." They stopped. Then Saint called. Frank wasn't just tracking houses. He was tracking deaths. 68 names. There's a folder marked Accelerated Cases. Eleanor is in it. Accelerated paperwork. Accelerated medication. Accelerated death. Mason climbed into Bull's truck. Hospital. At County General, Deputy Ramirez met him by the elevator. Bell tried to block the tox results, and the call that pulled Dean out of the cruiser came from inside this hospital. Then a crash came from Eleanor's room. Mason shoved the door open. The bed was empty. Monitor wires hung loose. On the floor lay Mason's leather jacket, folded neatly. On top of it sat one blue pill. A nurse ran in, pale. Transport took her, a man with a scar near his chin. Dean. Mason crouched by the jacket. It was inside out, inner pocket facing up. Eleanor had left him something. A hospital napkin. 3 shaky words. Laundry, basement, bell. They took the stairs to sub-level 2. In the laundry room, steam moved like ghosts between industrial washers. Dean had one arm around Eleanor's chest and one hand over her mouth. Behind him stood Dr. Bell, leather medical bag clutched to his chest. Ramirez raised her weapon. "Let her go." Bell started. "Deputy, this patient is under medical." "Shut up." Dean backed toward the loading door. "You going to shoot through her?" Then Eleanor went limp. His hand slipped from her mouth. She sucked in one breath and shouted, "He killed Dorothy!" Bell went white. Eleanor coughed. "He said Dorothy fought too hard. He said the dose was cleaner next time." Dean shoved her forward and ran. Mason caught her. Bull chased Dean but came back with a bleeding lip and empty hands. He got into an ambulance. Driver was waiting. No plates. Eleanor pressed something into Mason's hand. A hospital ID band. Dorothy Haynes. "Dean's pocket," she whispered. "I took it." Then she gripped his wrist. "Caleb has the tube." It was empty. It was supposed to be. Frank said the tube was bait. The real files were never in the grave. June arrived with Anita and deputies. "Then where?" June asked. "The grocery store," Eleanor whispered. "Frank gave them to Mr. Miller. Said if I ever showed up hungry, it meant Caleb had started. The old safe, manager's office, behind the cigarette cabinet." Seconds later, Saint called. "Caleb's behind Miller's grocery. Dean's with him. They're cutting through the back door." Mason stood. Eleanor caught his hand. "No anger. Frank used to say angry men miss small doors." "I'll find the door." 4 minutes later, Mason and Bull entered Miller's grocery through the broken back door. Dean stood in the manager's doorway with a pistol. Caleb crouched by the open wall safe. Papers, envelopes, VHS tapes, and a black ledger covered the floor. A red folder was soaked with lighter fluid. "Back up," Dean said. Mason raised both hands. "It's over." Caleb laughed. "Over is what happens when old people stop breathing and their houses become assets." Bull's voice came low. "You hear yourself?" Caleb held up the lighter. "Families dump parents into facilities every day and call it care. I just made it efficient." Dean's eyes flicked to Caleb. Half a second. A can rolled from the aisle. Dean looked. Bull struck his gun hand as the shot blew into the ceiling. Mason slammed Caleb against the wall. The lighter flew. The red folder dropped. Mason got there first. Dean hit the floor under Bull's weight. Caleb scrambled toward the lighter. Mason stepped on his wrist. Caleb screamed. Mason leaned over him. Eleanor was hungry. Caleb spat. She was dying anyway. Red and blue lights filled the alley. Deputy Ramirez cuffed Caleb on the floor beside the folder he failed to burn. Anita entered with her phone recording. June opened the black ledger. Names, dates, medications, property values, payouts, initials, CW, DB, SP, Breyer. And beside some names, one word written in red. Accelerate. June's voice shook. "It's all here." Caleb went still. For the first time, he looked afraid. Not of Mason, of paper. By sunrise, Miller's grocery was surrounded. Reporters filmed deputies carrying boxes from the office safe. Dr. Bell was detained after Nina Patel gave a sworn statement. Dean talked first, because men like Dean always did when loyalty stopped paying. By noon, Breyer development accounts were frozen. By evening, families of Silver Pines residents stood outside the facility with old photographs in their hands, demanding names, records, bodies, answers. 3 days later, Eleanor came home. The basement was blackened, porch damaged, kitchen stained with smoke. But the frame stood. Her wedding photograph survived. The ceramic ducts were cracked, but still on the steps. Nearly 300 motorcycles lined Briar Street when Bull helped her from the car. No one cheered. They just stood. Eleanor looked at them, one hand over her heart. Frank would have hated all this fuss. Mason smiled. Then he shouldn't have hidden evidence in a grocery store. She laughed once. Small. Real. Weeks passed. Caleb's face appeared on the news between words like fraud, conspiracy, unlawful restraint, arson, and negligent homicide investigation. Silver Pines closed under state order.
Some families got houses back. Some only got answers. Some got nothing but the terrible knowledge that they had not imagined, the silence. Eleanor turned her front room into a Sunday table. Soup, coffee, bread, rides to the pharmacy, a phone list taped beside the door. If you are hungry, knock. If you are scared, knock twice. If someone says you are confused, bring your papers. One evening, after the last riders packed leftovers into containers, there was a knock. Not one, two. Mason opened the door. An old man stood on the porch in a coat too thin for the cold, hands trembling around a folded paper. Behind him waited an old woman in a wheelchair. "They said my son signed for me," he whispered, "but I don't have a son." Mason took the notice. Same language, different name, different house, same machine. Behind him, chairs scraped. Bull stood. June reached for her glasses. Eleanor rose slowly from the table, no longer shaking from fear, but from recognition. Outside, engines began starting one by one. Mason looked past the old man and saw more headlights turning onto Briar Street. Not police, not reporters. People. Old people. Families. Neighbors. The forgotten, the embarrassed, the hungry. The ones who had been told no one would believe them. Eleanor stepped beside Mason and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. Mason looked at the folded notice in his hand, then at the line forming outside Eleanor Whitaker's house. That was when he understood the truth Caleb had been most afraid of. Eleanor had not been the last person they saved. She had only been the first.